I'm your host, Ivo-Castillo, here in Miami. And this podcast is for entrepreneurs, leaders with strong ties in Latin America who want to understand how Anglo founders work, think about growth, leadership, and decision making, and how to apply their mindset into your own business. Today, I'm excited to have Sylvia Lafair. She is the founder of CEO Options. Hello, Sylvia. How are you?
I'm good, and you look good too. You
Thank
look
you.
like you're good. So, thank you for having me on this program.
Thank you so much for your time. Sylvia, let's start. What led you focus on leadership, behavior, and organizational culture? What is your background and how all this start?
Well, I didn't plan to start in leadership development. I went to school, became a psychologist, and then went into the world of family therapy because I thought that it was the quickest route for change to get the people who weren't getting along, because that's why they go into therapy, to get along better. And I did that for a long time. So if there was anything about leadership, it was helping parents really become leaders for their children. But that's as far as I was planning to go. And then there's the famous story that I have to tell because it's a tap on my shoulder. When we were doing a program for parents whose teenage children were, making them very upset. And the room was very packed. And at the end of the meeting, some man walked over to me, and I assumed he was going to talk about his son or his daughter. And he simply said to me, "Will you come work with my senior leadership team?" Was totally out of left field. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "They're fighting." I said, "So what?" And it wasn't families I had to think about. People fight. He said, "No, Sylvia, he said, they have to get along better. And I think some of the things you talked about with families may be workable in the workplace." Well, it wasn't something I had thought about, but I went in, I
Hello.
think, and I love to tell people, take the risks and do something different. Make sure that, you can go back to what you were doing, but go and try something new. So I went in, and he was right. A lot of the things I did with families, I saw in the workplace. And so he hired me to keep working. And then it was one of those, he told a friend who told a friend. And all of a sudden, I thought, I'm doing leadership development and team building now. And it was an incredible, exciting time for me. And I've worked with a lot of large companies, a lot of family businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs, startups. And what I have found in every company, and it's not that different from families. So that's the bridge I kind of crossed, and I'm having fun on that other side of the.
And how long was that? How
I'm not
long
sure
ago was that?
how long ago, like
Yeah.
35
How many
years.
years you've been doing this
Yeah, it's
leadership?
been a long time.
Really?
Yeah.
And what do you start noticing inside companies that made you realize behavior is a problem?
Well, the word triggers has always been there for, what triggers you for people in general. In families, it was, I would watch and see what upset one person and didn't upset another person. And in the workplace, I started seeing the triggers. So when I would do the one-on-ones, the post-meeting, the pre-meeting, and the post-meeting, after we would have the whole team together, I would often say, "What is it that upset you so much when John said whatever he said? And why is it that later Will said something that was very similar and you acknowledged it?" And the person would say to me, "Well, John is always a problem." And I'd hear that everywhere. Somebody would kind of latch on to being annoyed with somebody, but they would give a lot of room for somebody else. We all do it. And we
Mhm.
do it in families too. There you look and even in small families where there are only two kids, we play roles in the family and it shows up at work. So I began to do some real experimenting and research. And in my one-on-ones with the leaders and with the team members that I was working with, I would ask a question and I'd do it very quietly. not loudly, very quietly, I'd ask, "Could you tell me a little bit about what it was like in your family when you were growing up?" And a lot of people would say, "Absolutely, this is not therapy, Sylvia. I'm not talking about my family. It's none of your business. Go away."
Mhm.
So I had years of really push because I knew I was onto something, but I wasn't getting the kind of cooperation I wanted. And there was nothing out there in the field, in the leadership field about connecting. I found one thing years maybe 4 years ago from the Harvard Business School where there was a leadership program, and one of the things they said is, "What you see in the boardroom often happened in the family." It was sort of like the shadows of the family. That was the only thing I ever found that made sense to me, but I just persevered, and I would get people to not show me the door and tell me that I had to leave and they didn't wanna work with me. I had to find the root, and I found it with this idea of looking at your triggers, what upsets you. We all get upset about stuff, and who was the person, and then they begin to see it differently, and somebody would say, "Oh, John was just like my brother who always wanted me to do all his work for him, and he's always telling me, you know, 'I don't have time, can you finish this for me?'" And I never told my brother he was annoying, I would just walk away. I would do the same with John, and I'd say, "Well, maybe we can find a better way," and we'd begin to look at communication. Does this make sense to you, what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yes, totally. Totally makes sense.
And the thing that's interesting is I've been privileged enough to work globally. So I've worked all over the world in many different situations. And it doesn't matter what language you speak, you know, what the specific culture is that you're in, although culture is important. I'll talk about that in a minute. But these issues all started from what I call our original organization, which is the family. And then it shows up in our present organization at work. And I just want to throw this in here because I think it's fascinating that we've created work to be not that different than the family. Think of it this way. We have bosses like parents. We have coworkers like siblings. We have salaries like allowances. And we also can get a timeout. At work, it's called a performance improvement plan. It's like being sent to your room in
Yeah.
many ways. So
Yeah.
it's the similarities are there, and the old stuff that triggers us starts to show up for all of us. I mean, we're not immune to that. We just have to learn to bring it to awareness. I hope
Yeah.
that helps
Yes,
clarify this.
that's fascinating. Based on your experience and this framework and methodology you are developing, what is the most common behavior that you see that limits the leaders?
Not looking at oneself. Now, in the last maybe 2, 3 years, I'm beginning to see more about self-awareness. It's interesting because Daniel Goleman, who's a very, very wonderful psychologist, really broke into the emotional intelligence realm. You know, it was always we use our heads, we think, we strategize, we make decisions, and he was able to connect and say, "Wait a minute, how you respond emotionally, what you think about, what you feel emotionally is really important." And then I've added the gut to that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I have to tell you a quick funny story about the feel stuff. I was doing a program with a group, and I had worked with them for a while, and we were at an offsite. And at the break, the director of the group came over and he said, "Sylvia, you've got to stop using the F word." And I looked at him and I said, "I've been totally appropriate. What are you talking about?" And he said, "You keep asking me how I feel." And he said, "I have no idea." It was a group of scientists. He said, "I have no idea how I feel. I only know what I think." So I
Yeah.
got the clue, and when we went back in for the rest of the afternoon, I would ask him the same questions, but instead of saying, "How do you feel about that?" I'd say, "Well, what do you think?" And he would still give me the feeling answer. So
Oh,
you begin to hear what people want and need, and one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that you meet where they are, not where you want them to be. You have to meet even language-wise and communication. So this man whose name was Chester gave me the greatest gift because the F word for many people to say how I feel is very difficult, and it's a learning from here to here. So I took this whole idea about triggers, and I thought, well, when you get triggered, what do? We react. You know, we
Yeah.
either make a snide comment or we walk away or we go tell a friend how terrible this person is or we
Right.
start a gossip chain. I mean, there are lots of things we do. And once we get that trigger, and we all get it, you get it head, heart, and gut, which I call the new leadership operating system, using all three head, heart, and gut. We then can take a breath. You have to pause, and then you can begin to say, "Why what is it that made me react that way?" And there will be a time where 3 times, I like the number 3, if somebody says the same thing to you 3 times about you, you always leave a meeting when it gets to be filled with conflict, you know? Always and never or don't exist. There is no always, there is no never, but we talk like that. But if you leave a meeting when there's conflict and people begin to notice it, I say, that's an avoider.
Hmm.
And avoiders, I call them the gotta go guy and gals because they'll always find they have an excuse to leave. When I've talked with them one on one in the coaching sessions, I will hear, well, I grew up where you were not permitted to say what you thought. And if you challenged anything, you were either smacked or sent to your room or you had privileges taken away. So they have learned to be careful. So that's one. The other that I see a lot is somebody who in the meeting is always saying, "Sure, I'll do it. Whatever you want, I'll do." I know I can see it now. In their heads, they're thinking, "You've got to be kidding. You've got to be kidding. That's crazy." But pleasers will do whatever you want them to do because they want to keep the peace. And when I've talked with the pleasers on a personal level, they have said, "Yeah, in the family, whenever there was conflict, I was the one that always had to smooth it over." So you begin to see the connection. Yeah,
Right.
the patterns. That's the word.
Amazing. And how don't we don't as a humans, we are built by patterns. Like we behave like from patterns, right? And to be aware of your own pattern, I think is one of the most difficult things that a human can do. But when you realize that, you can change, don't you think?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. Absolutely. The way out is first you have to observe them. Then you say, this has happened 2 or 3 or 4 times, or people have given me feedback that I don't respond easily enough. One group I worked with complained that whenever they went to their team leader with an issue, he would just look at them and say, "Go to HR." That's another way of avoiding. You don't have to actually walk out of the room, but he would never tackle them. And when I talked with him and he said, "Oh, our team is great. We have no problems." I said, "But people are saying that, when it's difficult, you sort of brush it off or send it elsewhere." He said, "Well, that's what you're supposed to do." I said, "No, they're coming to you as the leader. You go to HR if it becomes impossible." But they're asking for help earlier on, and he finally got it. And he said, "Look, I don't like to get into people's private stuff or do things that will make people look at each other differently." And I said, "But that's what leaders do." So it was, and he changed radically over a year's time. And we had and the good news is, as he changed radically and the team felt more trust for the group, sales went up.
Of course.
And, I knew I was onto something. This was a fairly large company. This was a little bit earlier on in this, but I want to give the foundation of it. And I had worked with a team pretty intensively. And the director of this group wanted a promotion, but she was told that she was creating contention elsewhere. So we worked on it and we got the team to be able to speak truthfully And I want to throw this in right here because one of the things I've learned in my journey with it is telling the truth is not spilling your guts.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I told people to make posters and put that on the wall because truth sentences are usually 7 to 9 words, and they don't include and furthermore, when you tell a truth sentence, you zip it. You don't go on because our tendency then is to go back to the trigger place and say, and furthermore, you this, you that, you that, you this, you this, you that.
Yeah. And one of I noticed, and it's as a family, and of course that replies in business is people tend to say to the world, "I'm brutally honest," or "I'm sorry if that make you feel uncomfortable, but it's the truth." And the problem with that, then you don't have to be rude or hurt people in order to be truthful. You can say the truth in a proper and manner way, right?
Well,
Without hurting people.
that's one of the things that I and my coaches teach, and I'd like to give that to you and whoever is listening to this. There is a process that I have found to be so effective when it comes to truth telling. And it goes like this. When you are late for meetings, right? But it starts with an observation of the other person, but you have to have your own self awareness to do this kind of stuff. But when you are always late for meetings, I feel we have the F word here. I feel discounted. I
Yes.
feel discouraged. I feel frustrated. I feel annoyed, whatever you're feeling. But it's when you dot, 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 I feel, so we'll use this one. When you are late for meetings, I feel discounted. And then and you're going to say what you do. I ignore you in the meeting. I let you speak last. I don't pay attention when you have questions because I'm so upset.
Right.
And the next part of this is what I'm willing to do is discuss this and work on it with you. What I'm not willing to do is pretend it doesn't matter. And then comes the big one. It's when you, I feel, and then what I'm willing to do is, what I'm not willing to do is, and now I'd like to hear from you.
Yes.
So it creates a dialogue of accountability on both sides.
And also give parameters, right? Like keep
Boundaries. Yeah.
boundaries, parameters, and limits and the stuff. So don't overexpose feelings, overexpose sentiments, overexpose words that doesn't need to be done or said, right? It's just,
That's exactly right. But and what I'm saying though is I'm telling you because culturally and there's a language difference, it doesn't matter. It's
yeah.
the
No.
same reactions. And once you begin to observe the family patterns, and I'm going to talk about in a minute the there are I came up with 13 of the most common patterns that show up at work that we learned as kids. So we just talked about two of them, the avoider and the pleaser.
Okay.
Another one is the superachiever, and I
Okay.
call that the me guy or gal. And that's somebody who absolutely has to be first, best at everything. And a lot of people have told me when they work with a superachiever, Sylvia, if I have an idea, I'll never tell Susie that because she'll take it, make it her own, and try to be the big star. So it diminishes trust and it diminishes collaboration when those kinds of things happen. So there's the superachiever, then there's the rebel, and the rebel is the one that has HR just goes crazy with the rebels because they always know the best lawyer in town. you know? And
Yeah.
they're always complaining about something.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to talk in a minute about how to transform them, but I'll just tell a few more. And then we have the procrastinator,
Okay.
and they say, well, I'll have it for you tomorrow. And the next day comes and you say, well, where is the project? They say, well, I didn't say which tomorrow. I just said tomorrow. And the fear and it's very frustrating because what we want at the base of groups is trust. We want that. And what I started to say before about being at this offsite with this fairly large company and this group I had worked with that built trust, And I just happened to be sitting next to one of the senior VPs in the meeting, and they're announcing who is winning awards, not because they liked each other, but for sales, who was doing the best. There were about 45 business units around the country. Who was winning the awards? And we sat there, and my group won one of the big awards. I said, "Oh, I've worked with them." And another group came up, and I said, and I wasn't really thinking about this at the time, I just said, "I've worked with them." So out of the 11 awards that were given, I had worked with 8 of the teams. So the VP said, "Sylvia, I think we better bring this into the whole company." And it was the trust. And that evening, we were at a team dinner, and somebody walked over and said, "Will you come work with my team?" And I was curious. I said, "Why?" "Because I've worked with these other teams that won awards." I didn't say that to him. I just said, "Why do you want me to work with your team?" He said, "Sylvia, we want the sales to go up. But the thing I really like is they're sitting at their they like each other. They're having fun. You can feel it. You
Yeah.
can get a sense of when the people are smiling and it doesn't mean anything, or when the tension is relaxed and they're having fun." So that's been, for me, the most important, powerful thing is, how do you get this foundation of trust?
When when you work with these teams,
Uh-huh.
what is that you find that the leaders does that hurt the team?
Hurts the team, HURTS,
Yeah.
hurts the team, judge them.
Judge them.
Judge them. It's when you come in with creative ideas, and some are good and some aren't, okay? But to say, "Oh, that won't work," shuts it down immediately, rather than, "How do you see this coming to fruition?" One of the things that leaders need to do is ask more questions, rather than leadership we feel needs to be definitive. You know, "Follow me, do this, do that."
Yeah.
Jump up when I say it, sit
Yeah.
down when I say it. It's
Yeah.
an old model, and it
Yeah.
doesn't really work to create the kind of collaboration and creativity and community that we're looking for, and we're really looking for community in this day and age. We're
Yeah.
looking for a place that we can feel safe, and if we mess up, we'll be helped to unmess it, to
Yeah.
move to the next place. But leaders who, and there is a thing about leaders in meetings.
Mhm.
Leaders need to go last. When a meeting is very much like a play. It's very much like a 3-act play or a 2-act play. And the leader or whoever's facilitating can set the stage, but whoever the leader is needs to let everybody else speak up first, and then they can say, "Well, here are some of the thoughts I have." Because if they say it first, it's very much like parents and children. There is a listening to what's going on. And, unless you're a rebel and you want to get in there and punch the whole thing, which will waste a lot of time, it's best if you go last, because then you'll get more honest answers. Does that
Correct.
make sense?
Correct. Totally. And now for small business owners that doesn't have these VPs, senior directors, and all these large companies, is there any biggest or there is any other type of mistake as a leader that stop them to growing?
I'm not sure. Give me an example of what you mean.
For example, the way a big company behaves, they have multiple leaders. They have VP, seniors, managers,
Right.
CEO, right? But in a small businesses, you have basically one or two leaders that run the company. The mistakes they made are the same as the biggest companies leaders do or are different?
Interestingly, they're pretty much the same. Because
Oh,
I've worked with a lot of small business owners, and there may be 1 to 5 people that work in a place.
yeah.
Asking questions, wondering, curiosity win, telling loses. At the end, you can say, "All right, I've thought about what the 3 of us have discussed, and here's the route I would like to take now. Is there anything else either either of you would like to say, or let's lock it down and move forward?" But the asking comes first, and the telling, if it needs to be, comes at the end. The other thing that in small businesses that often leaders think they're the only one who can do it. So
Yeah.
they take it all on, and by the end of a day, they're beyond exhausted. And there has to be some balance. It's not a 50-50 split between work and home, or, your business thinking and your personal creative thing. There's not a 50-50 split. And some days you need to work 100%. And some days you need to say, no, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to do whatever it is, go to a kid's soccer game or, go shopping or sit in and be quiet. And I believe quiet time, the pause for especially small businesses is totally important. You need to be able to say, why am I doing this? What is the outcome that I want? And who do I have who can support me in this? Those are the questions, but you've got to ask them and have a dialogue with somebody about them. But it's not that different from large companies. Yeah, I mean, the intensity is actually the intensity can be bigger in small companies. I've got to get it done or I'm not going to be able to, you know, pay the rent this month, stuff like that. So those are things that they often don't do. What I've learned is the communication and these truth sentences that say, and that's why I gave for whoever's listening to this or watching this, that when you, I feel, and then you can take it to the bank. It's a winner.
Yes.
People hear it,
Yes.
you know. I mean, I've used it for years and years and years, and I don't know if I even made it up or if somebody gave it to me. I've used it for so many years, but you can take it to the bank. The other, can I tell you one more and be taken to the bank? If you're in a conflict situation with somebody and they say, I'm really angry because you told me that I could take 3 days off and then you said I couldn't. The natural instinct is to defend, explain, or justify.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I told you that because we have a new company that we're going to work with and I need you here, blah, blah, blah. You go to, I'm really upset because you offered the 3 days and then you took them back. The next thing you say is 3 words, tell me more. I don't know how it works in the brain. I don't. I wish I could get inside or see a brain scan of this, but people will tell you more. Well, I'm angry because, and I understand you need me here because we're doing blah, blah, blah. But, my wife, I had planned to surprise my wife with something and now I have to hold off and I'm going to lose a little bit of money because of it. And you'll begin to see that instead of being there with knives sharpened looking at each other, you begin to hear the human dialogue. But tell me more it amazes me to this day, and I use it everywhere. So I
Uh,
hope that whoever's listening will begin
no.
to use that too.
Some there is a lot of leaders and this owners of small companies it will be that will be so valuable for them. Tell me a little bit more about
See, you just did it.
yeah, no, about how do you promote yourself? I know you have done some books and you write some books. How do you get clients?
Well, back in the day, I would speak. This is pre-COVID. I have not done this since, but it's fine for everybody. It's back. I would go in, I would speak at human resource conferences. I would speak at industry conferences. And for a lot of people, it would make sense. And then my first book came out, and having a book, they don't have to be big and fancy. They don't have to be from publishing now is pretty easy to do. But this was from a regular publisher. It's called Don't Bring It to Work, Breaking the
Yeah.
Family Patterns That Limit Success. And from that, we created a program called Total Leadership Connections. So I would
Mhm.
go to meetings and, the book would be there and people would say, whoever was there who read it, oh, it's wonderful. It's a good book. I'm writing another one now. I'm finishing the Glimmers book, looking at triggers to glimmers. But then the next one will be a shorter version of Don't Bring It to Work called Complete It or Repeat It. So once you can begin to see and become aware of your pattern as an avoider, as a pleaser, as a super achiever, whatever it is, and you understand that it came from your original organization, the family, then you do the strength training to transform it. And it doesn't take that long. For some people, it takes 2 months. For some people, it takes 6. But once you get that and you start to ask your own self, what do I want as an outcome from this conflict situation? And you begin to think about that's how we handled in the family. I don't want to do it that way now. You can move through things much more quickly.
Yes.
So that was the main way that I was, gaining clients. And then it was just a friend telling a friend telling a friend. And now with things on the internet now, there's
Mhm.
so many that you can do. We've taken our programs and we've put them online and people can get them there and they can still have some coaching rather than being in a retreat setting and having to go away for 2 or 3 days or 4 days. It's much easier now. So that's what I'm doing now is with the programs online and starting a membership group that I've never bothered doing till now, but I think it's time so that people can talk to and meet each other, not just hear me go blah, 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 blah.
And let's what are the challenge that as a this growing because you're growing your product, your books, your coaching. What are the biggest challenge that you're trying to solve?
I think on one level, it's having the trusted staff that you need so that you don't have to worry about everything. The I've got your back kind of thing.
Yes.
And I am so grateful because I have an incredible virtual assistant. The world has changed so much from the days where you had to all be in the office sitting there and whether you wanted to be or not, you can create time differently now. And having people that you can say, will you take care of this and let me know what you find from this and know that they'll do it. And that's where you can do it with 2 or 3 people.
Yes.
I don't know about doing it totally alone. For many years, my husband worked with me. Since COVID, he loved being in the group programs and he doesn't like doing it online so much. So he said, "Well, I think maybe I'm gonna back off from this and you do what you want." I said, "Okay, bye. See ya. I'll do it." So I do the podcasts and I talk with him, but we had maybe 4 people on our staff that it's like waiting to exhale. When things are tough, you inhale and you stay there, and then you get tense, and that's when all these triggers and patterns show up even more.
Right.
Once you can exhale, so it's and asking the questions, you need people that you can trust, you can help them grow. That's your job as a leader, but it's critical to have at least a couple of people, a good assistant, and a few others that will help you. And then you have to decide how big do you want to grow?
Correct.
How important is it to be I'm looking, a lot of the billionaires are not the happiest people on the planet.
Yeah. 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 And the family is not as good as they think. I would think, right?
That's that's good. Yeah, exactly.
It's priorities in life is like I say.
Yeah.
There is people who has care more about family than work, than success, professional success. And there is other people who prefer be more success at job than their family in their
I was watching the, film, I think it's a couple of years old, but I was watching it the other day, Jobs, about Steve Jobs.
Mhm.
And, he was an interesting human being, brilliant,
Yes.
and in that genius realm, they have their own personality profiles, I guess. But Steve Wozniak, I think I'm pronouncing it, came to him at some point and said, I can't do this anymore. Family and my other part of my life is more important. So, listen, he's made many millions. I'm not
Yeah.
sad
Yes.
for him, but, for it's and that I think culturally, what I talked about is family and how the family values and the family patterns show up, but there are also cultural patterns that have to be looked at, and I'm here in the United States, and the cultural pattern here has been the more money you make, the better you are, and the more money you make, the happier you'll be, except it doesn't equate.
Yeah. Except that that doesn't really I think it is, no? I think making more money, it make it easier, but it not make it happier.
It's really deciding for you, I mean, some companies I've worked with, I'm working with a company now that's so ready to grow. and they need more people. And the owners of it, two owners, sort of got scared. Well, what's that going to do to our personal time? I said, well, that's what you have to navigate. And that's where you have to, that's we talked about boundaries. That's where you create the boundaries and decide. And it's step by step. For me, writing is my happy place. So when I can sit and I love working with people and I love working with the teams, but there are times when I can feel the stress getting to me and I have to shut everything off and I'll go sit and I'll start working on the book I'm writing or a personal novella that someday maybe I'll have out there. Who knows? But
Yeah.
I can feel literally, I can feel my blood pressure go down when I can sit and just play with words and help people with their communication is the next step for that.
And our last question, Sylvia, what is your mindset?
My mindset is life is an adventure. And, not all adventures are easy. But I have been very lucky to be able to do some unique things like hike the Inca Trail in Peru and yeah, and visit Machu Picchu, and, kind of jump off a cliff in New Zealand attached to a rope, not just jumping. So I have always seen an adventure. And when things don't go well, I get annoyed and I'll moan and complain and whine I'll give myself 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But my mindset then is, well, what are you learning from this? It's an adventure. And that's my mindset to just keep going and keep growing no matter what. And your questions are absolutely wonderful. I want to acknowledge the good quality of your questions today. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you. And thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast and watching. See you next time. Bye.